Running a global company from San Francisco is probably the worst place on earth.
You have exited not only once, 3 times, and you're still building.
Because I got the idea and I want to prove that I was right.
So you're basically betting on blockchain.
There's already 500 million people in the world having stablecoins.
You didn't expect these kind of questions.
I'm not a very good employee.
What kind of boss are you?
I'm not a very good boss.
That's your answer?
I don't like to tell people what to do. I was right and they were wrong.
Today's guest unpacks his multi-exit journey, the costly lessons on relying too much on investors, how to manage a global team across time zones, and how to keep alive outside work while running a company that never really slows down. Eric Barbier has lived several chapters of the fintech story. He built a mobile messaging startup and sold it for more than $400 million. He then scaled a cross-border payments venture into a global network. Now, he leads AAA out of Singapore, a regulated payments institution that lets businesses accept and send stablecoins instantly. Stay with us for another exciting episode of Asia Tech Lens. Eric, thank you so much for joining us on Asia Tech Lens. So far, I've talked to startup founders who are still in their first company, but you have exited not only once, 3 times, and you're still building. I want to go back to this journey with you. Maybe start from the beginning. Were you a corporate guy before you moved to Singapore?
No, I was already an entrepreneur when I moved to Singapore. I've been working only 3 years as an employee. 3 years in my life. The 3 first years after graduating from engineering school.
So which industry were you at? You graduated in engineering?
I started in the IT. In the IT, I was actually, my first job was a developer. I was developing the software inside SIM cards. So I started as a developer, then I became project manager, then product manager, within 3 years, I've been starting my own company with couple of other founders.
What was your first venture?
Our first venture was a company called initially Mobile Way, which then was called Mobile 365, which was doing SMS. I don't know if you remember the thing which was before WhatsApp. And so what we were doing was interconnecting the mobile operators among themselves. Internationally, so enabling, for instance, a Singtel subscriber to be able to send SMS to a Chinese subscriber, because back then the networks were not interconnected, so we were a hub between them, and then we expanded to enabling, for instance, bank to send one-time password through SMS and that. So it was essentially an SMS network connecting the different mobile operators around the world.
And you operated that in France?
We started the company in France, but we reincorporated very quickly in the US. That was in the .com, so we started in '99, so right in the middle of the .com era. So it was technically an American company, and we raised like $70 million back then. So really heavily venture backed, and I started. I was the CTO in the company when I started, and then I wanted to move to business, and that's how I moved to Singapore to expand the business in Asia.
Co-founders are mostly French, but US company, US VC backed, and then you were sent to Asia to explore this market. And for you, when you first came to here, what was your game plan and how did you conquer?
What was very interesting in Asia compared to Europe is the fact that in Asia people are way more pragmatic, meaning that they are not looking to have a 5-year business plan and things which is where there's no unknowns. In Asia it's more like, oh, it kind of makes sense. It doesn't cost much money to do. Let's give it a try. It works great. It doesn't, never mind. And so that was where working, dealing with the mobile operators. Hong Kong was a very interesting market for us because back then there were 6 mobile operators. So on a tiny island like Hong Kong, 6 mobile operators, very, very deep competition between them. And so they were always looking for new things and so on. So that was really great for us because they were really wanting to differentiate and get new services for their clients.
That was the stage you said that Asian operators or big enterprises are actively looking for innovations and they're willing to try.
Absolutely, and that's pretty unique to Asia in general.
Yeah, because what I heard is like Asian investors, Asian clients, they are more conservative, right?
That's not my experience. In most cases, we've been able to launch in Asia way faster. They're more risk taker in Asia than in Europe or in the US.
And then, so this business you sold in 2006 for $425 million.
Yeah, we sold it to Sybase, which was a database, big database provider, and Sybase then got acquired by SAP, the German accounting software, ERP software.
Right. But you stayed on to continue to look after that side of the business.
Yeah, not very long, because I'm, as I keep saying, I'm not a very good employee. So I'm a better entrepreneur. So that's why I started very quickly my next startup.
What made you not a good employee?
Because I like to do whatever I think I want, whatever I think is good, and I don't like to explain why I'm doing something. So it usually doesn't work very well with my bosses.
So what your first exit at 425 million? How did you feel after? Like, how did you celebrate?
So on the day of the announcement, I was going to taking the plane, and back then it was difficult to find French newspaper in Singapore, and you could buy at the airport very expensive. I think it was like $10. They were printed on almost on demand, and say, I'm going to spend $10 for that.
Newspaper days, huh?
Exactly. But no, joke aside, our first thing is like 400 million looks like a very big number. The reality, and maybe that's a tip for entrepreneurs who might be listening, is that we got heavily diluted. So the founders, no matter having an amazing exit, and some of the VC did a lot of money, the founders were heavily diluted, and so not enough to stop working. I would pray not have.
You didn't achieve a so-called financial freedom from that exit.
Absolutely. So that's the big lesson I got, is that because the bubble exploded, and then we had VCs. We had to raise money at very. We had to do down rounds. And the VCs have not been super helpful in running the business, because the goal of VCs is really to go for the big exit, like the
higher valuation.
So they're pushing you to spend more, to go faster, to go for growth, and not as much maximizing value for the founders. So that's something. That's been a lesson learned. But even though we did all the possible mistakes and so on, we learned so much. So I didn't have to pay for an MBA.
And then straight away, you started another company almost immediately.
So initially, TransferTo was. And I got the idea when I was in my previous in the SMS business, my previous SMS business. because we were doing a lot of business, for instance, between Hong Kong and the Philippines or between Singapore and the Philippines, given that there's a lot of Filipino foreign workers in those two places. So it was already big corridors. And once I was in the Philippines, and I discovered that in the Philippines, people could exchange to each other prepaid mobile credit. You know, in most emerging markets, people are not using postpaid bills, so they're not paying like their bills on a monthly. They have to.
They buy the prepaid card, yeah.
Absolutely. So you have to prepay, and so they what they had one nice feature, which was you could give essentially your credit, your prepaid mobile credit to a friend or relatives. And so when I associated the two, the fact that I was doing cross-border SMS and you could send airtime, prepaid mobile credit, I say, oh, let's do it internationally. So let's enable someone in Singapore, for instance, to send his Singapore dollar credit to a mobile phone in the Philippines, in Indonesia, across the world. And so that was the first idea, was to enable so-called international top-up, enabling typically foreign workers to send a small gift back home by giving $1 to $10 to their relatives back home.
I didn't know international top-up exists even today.
Yeah, it still exists. I think we in Singapore we were working with all the telcos. Our very first transaction was actually between Malaysia and Indonesia, where we were working with Maxis, Digi.
Two telcos from two different markets have to come up with some agreement. So, for example, in Singapore, I top up through Singtel, and then a local operator in the Philippines, whatever it is going to accept that credit transfer. Is that how it works?
So we were the hub. So what we're, and the company still exists, and this one is called DT1. So what we were doing is we are buying, we become essentially a prepaid mobile credit distributor of the Filipino telco, and we were reselling this to Singtel in your example.
And so what's the business model? How do you make money?
So we were getting a discount from the
bulk purchase,
operator.
yeah.
So when I was buying, I don't know, $100 worth of airtime, I was maybe buying it only for 90, and I was selling it to Singtel, and Singtel was also charging a fee, a convenience fee, which was a percentage of a transaction. Remember, it's a very small amount, $1, $2, $3. So, and if you compare it to using Western Union or MoneyGram, because when you pay with Western Union, if you want to send a very small amount, because they charge you a transaction fee, it's usually not making sense economically, and so. So we were essentially taking a percentage of a transaction as a fee.
This business was later sold for $38 million in 2010, 4 years later.
Yeah, absolutely.
What did they see in TransferTo? Why did they want to purchase TransferTo at that juncture?
So I think the reason they acquired us is because they were very dependent on the hardware revenues. And so I think they kind of indicated to the market that they would be having like, I think 20% of their revenues coming from services, and because they were late, and because we had some pretty good revenues, that's why they decided to acquire us.
What kind of revenue did you have at that point? Do you remember?
I hope I'm not going to say something stupid, but I would say probably in the $50-60 million, but don't quote me on this.
So you sold the company on a discount. You sold it for 38 million.
No, but that's the revenue. And that's the top line revenue. So the profit margin was obviously below that.
And then what happened? Did you stay on? What did you do?
So yeah. And since the company was pretty early, I had a fairly long earn-out period. So I had to stay for 3 years, which I did. The great thing is that I still remained the CEO of the company. We were really very independent. And they did not really integrated us, and that's where I decided to move to the US. So I moved to San Francisco, feeling like I've got 3 years to stay in the company, so I'd rather do something interesting. So that's why I moved to the US and to start the business in the US, because most of the business was in Asia, Middle East, but not so much in the US. And after the 3 years, actually the US became our first market.
Oh wow! Okay, so what the US customers? They want the same kind of service, or did you have to?
Maybe one piece of advice as well is that if you want to develop the US market, one of the founders have to go there, because it's a difficult market, because it's so big that it has its own rules. So if you just try to push what's been working in the rest of the world, and it's not always easy for the salespeople to explain you what has to change. In our case, we had to change the way we were doing the pricing, because our pricing was not fitting how the competition, how people were understanding it, and because of that, we had to do some tweaks in the product. But it took us a long time to figure out. The analogy I always take is like, in the rest of the world, people are using 220 volts for electricity, but if you come with your thing in the US, it's not going to work because it's 110 volts. And so that's the kind of thing where you need to think about adjusting to the local market.
You say you have to adjust the pricing. Is it the way you present the pricing, or is it?
Yeah, the pricing structure. So we didn't change the price or margin, or it's not like it was more competitive. Not really, but the way the price structure was designed, our standard way of doing things, which was, people would not understand.
And how did you learn that? Is it from your local sales team? How did you find out?
Talking directly to clients. I think that's the thing. And because I already had some salespeople on the ground before, and they were not able to explain to me what we had to change. And also for me, it was difficult to understand, because saying, hey, it's working in all those countries. There's no reason it wouldn't work in the US, but I was wrong.
So how was the San Francisco experience? It must be like Mecca for all the entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, it was a teenager dream. I've always been into computers and stuff, so that's where I wanted to go for a long time.
Did it fulfill the expectation, or it came short?
I'm glad I did it, but after almost less than 5 years, I came back to Singapore. One of the very pragmatic issues is running a global company from San Francisco is probably the worst place on earth. The time zone is really difficult. You're always late, even within the US. One thing I learned is that 2/3 of the US population sits on the eastern time zone. So, so when you're waking up in the morning, if you start your day at 9, people are already going to lunch in New York, and obviously Europe is going to bed. So very tough time zone. It was really tough.
But then why so many global tech companies are based there?
Because it's a bubble, and that's why maybe they are successful. It's because when you're in California or in Silicon Valley, it's all about in your own little bubble. And I think it's great for innovation. They attract a lot of great people, and so it's great to start from this. And all those great American companies, ask anyone who tried to have a call from Singapore. They give you a time between 9 and 3 p.m. maximum Pacific time. Huh? So when you want to work with, I don't know, Google or Meta or whatever, you have to adapt to their time zone. So
they do feel like they're in the center of the universe, right?
Absolutely.
And fast forward, how long did you stay on with that company?
So I stayed until 2017, kind of disagreement with the controlling shareholder. He bought me out. I tried to retire, to not work.
That was your third exit, right?
Yeah, that was the third exit. So I tried not to retire. I tried to make investment in startups, sitting on boards and so on, but it became a bit boring, and because I like to be in the driving seat. That's how I started AAA in 2019.
So let's say after 3 exits, you already had financial freedom.
Yes.
So AAA is really out of passion.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. So, what was the idea of AAA came from, and what's the biggest drive? Like when people, when you don't have to work anymore, and what pushed you feel like I have to do this thing? Why?
Because I got the idea, and I want to prove that I was right. And that's my driver. Is like I've got a. And so that's why I have to execute and to prove that there is a market, there is a need, I'm solving a problem. And I got educated with crypto actually by my developers. It was a Friday night, I remember. Usually on Friday nights they were playing video games, and I was staying a bit late that night. But this night, I saw that they were not playing video games. I said, well, what are they doing? And they educated me. They were doing crypto mining with my electricity. And they got me educated about crypto. I bought my first Bitcoin back then from one of my developers and so on.
Which year was that?
That was 2017? Yeah.
Or was it at less $30,000 US dollars?
Oh, no, it was way less. It was 5K or something.
So your engineer used your electricity but paid you back big time.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't complain. And so I discovered with crypto that it was solving some of the problem I had in the company, in what is now called Tunes, which is the fact that in the remittance industry everything is pre-funded. So it means that we need to pre-fund money with all our partners across the world. So it means that there's a lot of money which is trapped in working capital. And the beauty of, in particular, stablecoin payments is that you are able to do payment real time, including weekends and bank holidays. Because our big issue for us was really the worst was a public holiday on a Monday, so it means like it's 3 or 4 days of cash that we need to prepay. So imagine it's the end of Ramadan, for instance, where people are sending a lot of money back home to Africa, to India, to Bangladesh, and so on. It means that we had to put a lot of money in pre-funding, and so that stablecoin is solving this problem. And the other thing is, like, especially for our clients, when our clients actually, when they are paying with credit cards, there's risk of fraud. There's risk of, I don't know if you know, chargebacks. So meaning that if someone has used a stolen card, the cardholder can always say, "Oh no, I didn't do that transaction," and then it's the merchant who has to bear the risk of this fraud. So and it's a full loss. What's great with stablecoin is because it's on the blockchain, there's no way to reverse a transaction. So there's no risk of fraud or chargeback. for the merchant, and that's why I started to start AAA.
Maybe for our audience who are not so familiar with stablecoin, maybe we explain the difference between stablecoin and cryptocurrency.
So stablecoin is a form of crypto. So they are all based on the blockchain. So meaning that we can securely exchange to each other some value, a token. So it can be the traditional crypto like Bitcoin or Ethereum, more recently, but it's a special digital currency, a special crypto were created, which are called stablecoin, which are pegged 1-for-1 to the US dollar. So it has the benefit of crypto, meaning that you can safely send a token to anyone on the planet without the issue of the volatility of Bitcoin and the other crypto, because the stable coins are pegged 1-for-1 for the US dollar. So each time there is, if I buy $100 worth of stablecoin from the stablecoin issuer, the two main stablecoin issuers are Circle and Tether. Then they buy exactly they put $100 in a bank account. So it's supposed to be always 1-for-1.
Right now, I read in one of your blogs that the majority of the transitions are still using US dollar pegged stablecoin, right? So in a way, people always say like US dollar as the reserve currency is going to end, but the digital form of it is still ongoing.
You know, you're absolutely spot on. It's funny because I don't know if you remember, but there were some people at Congress in the US who were saying, "Oh, crypto is terrible for the US because it's going to have an impact on US dollar dominance," and it's exactly the opposite which happened. It's absolutely increasing US dollar domination across the world. If you normally euro is supposed to be like 20% of the trading currencies, but when you look on stablecoin, it's probably less than 1% of the outstanding value, which is in euro-denominated stablecoins.
This year, I go to a lot of conferences, and people everywhere are talking about AI. But I remember moderating one panel talking about the innovative technology. So after the one guy came to me, he's like, "You guys only talk about AI, but AI is like, almost peaking. But what we really need to look at is blockchain, is another innovation that's underreported, under-talked." So you're basically betting on blockchain, right? So why do you think this is the next thing?
It's making cross-border payments 10 times more efficient than the current solution like SWIFT or Visa, MasterCard, and so on, especially with emerging market. Today, to make a SWIFT payment, it's going to be quite expensive and very slow, especially to emerging markets. Same thing for someone in Vietnam to make a card payment. It's very expensive for both the cardholder and the merchant to enable this transaction. Plenty of times the payment, it just fails. For all those use cases, really stable coins, which is based on the blockchain, is a perfect solution. But I'm not saying that AI is not going to change the world as well, but stablecoin is going to have a big impact on the world of payment. Yes. Today there's already 500 million people in the world having stablecoins, so it's massive.
500 million.
Yes, so it's bigger than PayPal, for instance, just to give you a sense of the size.
500 million people have stablecoin, but the amount of stable coins they hold equals what kind of value? Do we know?
It's 300 billion. Still not, if you compare to the money which is on traditional bank accounts and so on, it's not Today, what is being settled with stablecoin is already bigger than what is being settled on the Visa network.
So tell us how you have clients who are like global luxury retailers, Grab, etc. Give us a sense like how you help them to serve their customers globally.
Yeah. For us, the ideal client is global e-commerce merchants who are selling internationally. Again, because stablecoin is really useful for cross-border payments, and a bit less. We're not so interested in having a pure Singapore merchants only selling into Singapore. It's probably not the biggest use case. One of our merchants, for instance, is Trip.com, which is probably the largest online travel agent in the world.
Chinese company.
Correct. Yes. For us, it's really a perfect merchant because travel, by definition, they are selling across the world. It's fairly high ticket item because of the fraud issues and so on. They are considered by the card network, MasterCard and Visa, as higher risk. What this brings is that with our stablecoin payment solution, they're able to sell to those 500 million people around the world who have a stablecoin without ever touching anything stablecoin or anything crypto. We're licensed by MAS as a major payment institution, and we're licensed we have the merchant acquiring activity to do merchant payment. We also have money transfer and the last activity, which is called digital payment token, which is the name in Singapore for anything crypto related. And so we're making sure all the transactions are processed safely to avoid any kind of money laundering risk.
How exactly it works is like people holding stablecoin can purchase a flight ticket, for example, on Trip.com using their stablecoin, but Trip.com does not necessarily receive. They receive in whatever currency they want to receive, and you handle the middle part of the work.
Absolutely, you're spot on. So the reason Trip.com and all our other clients are working with us is because they are happy to sell to those stablecoin holders, but they don't want to touch any of this. And so what we're doing is that they're selling.
You remove the friction.
Yeah, absolutely. They're selling a plane ticket for, I don't know, $1,000, they get exactly $1,000 on their bank account. And so for them, it's totally transparent and have less fees than what the credit cards are charging. That's also a big plus.
What's your fee structure?
So we charge a transaction fee, which is typically 3 times cheaper than what the traditional payment service providers through cards are charging.
Well, does that depend on the amount? Then there's a different tier of.
Yeah, it depends on the volumes. It depends on the volumes. Yes.
Are your clients all B2B? Do you do B2C as well?
So we are always B2B, but so we never have individual as clients. So all our clients are B2B. They can be themselves selling to consumers like Trip.com, or they can sell to other businesses. So we started more on the e-commerce side. So when our clients are selling to consumers, but we're having more and more use cases for B2B. For instance, now we're starting to see import-export companies who are interested in accepting stablecoin payments, in particular from their clients in emerging market. I can give you an example. A Chinese exporter via Hong Kong, for instance, his client is in Africa. In Africa, they're having issues to source US dollar, but they're able to get access to stablecoins. And so what happens is that the African clients gives us the stablecoins, and we are giving Hong Kong dollars or US dollar to the Chinese exporter.
Okay, so 5 years ago, when you talked to potential clients, those businesses, what kind of attitude they had towards stablecoin, and has that attitude been evolving today?
So funny, when I started like 2020, 2021, the whole mood on crypto was pretty good. And so we had interest, and we were signing clients and so on. What has been the big problem is when FTX collapsed. A lot of issues at that time, and so that were we had like 2 years which were a bit tough until the new president in the US changed as well the mindset on everything crypto and in particular stablecoin now with the Genius Act. So yeah, to be transparent, there's been like 2 years, I would say 2020 to 2024, which were not so easy because people are, oh no, I don't want to hear anything related to crypto, and all this kind of we don't want to be associated with that and so on, and this in the last 10 months or so, this has really disappeared now.
Share with us the regulatory environment in the past 5 years when it comes to.
So I got very lucky to start in Singapore because Singapore was the first jurisdiction in the world to have crypto regulation. The Payment Service Act came into force in 2020, and it was well designed and was really fitting super well our business model, which was payment using crypto and stablecoins. So we were a perfect fit across the world. So then when we expanded into Europe, so when we acquired a payment institution license, so in Europe it's a bit more complex because you need to deal with two regulators, one which is more on the payment side and one which is more on the security side. So it's a bit more complex and painful than in Singapore, where there's only one regulator for everything. In the US, it's even worse because it's one regulator per state plus a federal regulator. So it's a lot of work to deal with state by state licensing and regulators.
You will now have license for all these jurisdictions.
Yes, yeah, we are.
When you say Europe, you mean any particular country in Europe, France, for example, or Europe?
So in Europe, there's a passport system. So it means that once you have a license in one country, you can operate across all the European Union countries. So our licenses, so both the crypto license and the payment license, are in France, and this enables us to operate across the whole European Union.
And in the past, I would say 12 months, there's also quite a lot of development in Hong Kong and China side, right? Are you closely looking at that market as well?
Yes, yeah. Hong Kong is a big market because, again, on our side, we are really focusing on developed markets. So for us in Asia, it's mostly Singapore and Hong Kong, Europe or US, but that's really the key markets we're looking at. So Hong Kong is important because they have introduced this year a stablecoin issuing regulation, where a lot of people get really excited and everybody thought it would go very fast. It looks like things are not moving as fast as expected. I think they received a lot of applications, so the regulator received a lot of applications. So I think they are trying to be a bit selective, which kind of makes sense because I've heard that they received like 60 applications, so it doesn't make sense to have 60 stablecoin issuers in Hong Kong.
What's your goal for your fourth startup? What's the goal for AAA?
But the goal is to build something as big as possible. My views is that stablecoin will be between 5 to 20% of cross-border payments in the next 2, 3, 4 years. It's difficult to predict exactly.
Right now, it's at what's the percentage? Less than 1%?
Yeah, less than 1%. And so I want to be the leader on this segment of the market.
You are a serial entrepreneur. How do you see your career in lesson learned from building company A? Can you apply that onto the next venture, or how does that relate, or does it, or you just have to deal with what's coming at you at this moment?
No, of course your experience matters, and you're becoming more efficient. You avoid repeating the same mistakes.
What would you say the biggest mistake or lesson you learned?
There's plenty of things, and some of them I have shared. So, for instance, look at the cash. Always how much cash you have left, because you don't want to have to raise money when you need money. And so it's very important to manage your spending.
How much money do you need to keep? Is it for your company to operating for another year or two? Is that how you look at things?
Yeah, I think that's a good metric. Having 1 year, at least 1 year to 18 months of runway is a good practice. So it means that when you're going to negotiate with potentially new investors, they're not going to be able to twist your arm to accept terms you might not want to accept otherwise.
What have you learned dealing with the VCs?
By dealing with the VC, you need to understand that we are not totally alike. They are looking for moonshots, and especially when you are maybe an earlier founder, you're maybe not looking for moonshot, and you're more looking at financial independence. Very often, I would hear VCs. The thing VCs don't like is that you raise money, say, at a valuation of $50 million, you raise 10 million. And then within 1 year, you have a proposal for someone to buy you at 100 million. It's a bad deal for a VC. Times two in 1 to 2 years, but it can be a very good deal for the founder. And so that's one of the things founders have to pay attention to.
So are VC always looking at 10x? Is that the industry standard?
Yeah, but that's really what they're what they're looking at, and that they want to have those outliers.
So you operated in many markets, Asia, Europe. What are the differences? What are these different communities?
A bit what I shared earlier about in Asia, people are way more pragmatic. Obviously, Asia is very diverse, so it's difficult to say Asia. Doing business, I don't know, in Korea is very different than doing it in Hong Kong. But overall, if we take ASEAN plus China, I would say people are very pragmatic. Talking about Korea, for instance, or Japan, which have more similar cultures. What is really nice is that you are working with people who are really looking at all the details. And they are very prepared. What I love when I go there is that when you show up for a presentation, they have already worked very, very well. They politely listen to your presentation, but they already know everything. And then how can we ask questions? And you can see that they are very well prepared. That's something which is very interesting.
Not like that in Silicon Valley. They like to tell stories, right?
Yeah. So they're super good at telling stories. Even in Stablecoin, there's been some amazing, companies who sold companies on nice stories and so on. It's they're very good storytellers. That's probably something we need to learn to do in Asia.
That's something you often think about as a French background, because French education are not also your engineering background, right? Is that something that you intentionally work on?
Yeah, the problem is that the French education, and it's probably the same in Asia, is that you are being told to answer the questions. And the thing you need to de-learn is that when someone is asking you a question, you should not answer the question. You should just tell what the pitch you want to.
Your key message, right?
Exactly. and so yeah, that's the bad habit. But that's what I keep telling to my staff as much as possible is that you don't have to answer the question.
That's the media training 101.
Yeah, for media, absolutely, but for everything, it's like, oh yeah, but they ask this question. Don't reply. You will see, if they insist, maybe they will forget.
Your staff, are they very diversified? Coming from where? How many staff do you have, and how do you bond with them?
Globally, we're about 80, and Singapore being the headquarters, we pretty half of the people, a bit more than half of the people are in Singapore. So it's very diverse, obviously, and I'm trying to match the culture. And that's I've always been running global businesses. So in Tunes, I was doing a lot of business in Latin America. And when you have people more from the Chinese, Singaporean culture with people from, more Latino and so on, there's a big
difference,
clash.
big contrast.
Exactly. And so what I'm trying to do is that, at least once a year, people are coming to Singapore. Sometimes it's not possible to bring everybody at the same time, but like team by team, making sure that the whole global tech team meets here or somewhere nearby. Meeting face to face is key. So that people because like through the Slack, the emails and so on, they kind of lose the feeling that they are talking to actual human beings.
Do you still strongly believe that Singapore is the better place to build a global company?
Except the time zone, yes.
You said Silicon Valley has the worst time zone, but Singapore is
a bit tough to deal with the US, and that's a good point, because even Singapore leaders are not thinking enough. I feel like that they need to have global businesses headquartered in Singapore. Very often, there's still this mentality that Singapore is only for Asia, only for an Asia headquarter. But no, it can also be a global headquarter. Everything is really very, as an entrepreneur, everything works. Fairly low taxes. The government is very approachable.
The Singapore success story that we all benefiting from, right?
Our regulator MS is fairly pro-business. It's pretty unique.
What kind of boss are you?
I'm not a very good boss, because I don't like to tell people what to do. I'm expecting them to tell me what I should be doing. Sometimes I have to micromanage and look into the details, but I don't like to do that. So I like to give as much autonomy as possible.
So you want them to have a lot of initiatives, but they also look for your guidance for strategic directions, right? How do you balance?
Yeah, if it's strategic direction, that's easy. What I don't like is, what I hate is like, oh, tell me exactly what you need. I know we want this, but if I had to tell you exactly what I need, I'd rather do it myself. I don't need to have an employee for that, right?
So what kind of employee would thrive in your organization?
Someone who is independent and who can, take a topic and run with it as much as possible. So
they are likely to go run their own business.
Absolutely, yeah. I've got a couple of my former employees who end up starting their companies. I'm usually an investor in them, and sometimes I'm happy to provide some advices if I can.
I noticed that you are fostering this community. Like you are president of the French Tech. Is that how long has that been? I mean, what's the vision and mission? Is it a global organized community, or is it?
Yeah. It was initiated by the current French president when he was at the Minister of the Economy and Finance.
Macron? It was initiated by Macron?
Yeah, it was initiated by Macron. So it's a global, it's something which started in France and has expanded into, and we have a pretty vibrant community of entrepreneurs and people in the tech industry in Singapore, and it's an open community, so it's not only for French people. Feel free to join our WhatsApp or our events. They are always all in English, and so we have like three types of people. Typically the startups started by usually French or French-speaking people and their employees. We have also the tech guys from the large French corporation. There's plenty of very large global companies having a big offices here in Singapore and in particular in the tech. And the last one, which is one of our mission, is to help the French startup coming from France to set up shop in Singapore and help them expand into the region.
What about your free leisure? What do you do when you're not building your companies?
Are
you a 007 kind of person?
No, not 007 because I like to sleep a bit. But no, I usually work. What I do when I'm typically in France, I've got a house south of France. The thing which I like to do is gardening.
But you don't live in France, so how do you garden?
No, but when I go there for summer holidays.
For summer holiday, yeah. It's very therapeutic, yes.
Exactly. So the mind. I used to have a garden in Singapore, and I was spending.
That's a true luxury to have a garden in Singapore.
I had the best grass in Singapore.
Hard to achieve. Is there any book or movie that you would recommend that kind of shaped you in a certain way?
Yeah, usually my favorite movies are the Charlie Chaplin, in particular The Dictator, is one movie I really like.
What do you do to de-stress, because as a leader you have to make decisions all the time? How do you keep your calm?
If the funny thing is that if I'm really stressed, the best way is for me to actually work. I try to work on something a bit more creative, but I like to build slides to explain in one slide a particular product.
Impressive. People always ask female leaders, how do you balance work and life? But I have made a point that I will ask male leaders, how do you balance work and life, a family?
I think I've been a very bad dad.
I'm sure they don't agree. How old are your children?
Oh, now they're big. 24, 21, and 18.
Okay. So that's your answer? They think you're a bad dad?
I don't dare to ask them, but I remember I was not telling them when I was traveling quite a bit, and I was trying to go after they went to bed or before they woke up. So I didn't spend enough time with them, that's for sure. Yeah.
So the short answer is it's hard to balance.
Absolutely.
Are you a good husband?
Probably more than a husband, yeah. Than a father, yes.
So your wife is very supportive of all your...
Yeah. I've been super lucky.
Does she stay at home or does she have a career?
No. She has a work, but she doesn't have to travel as much as I used to.
Well, I guess living in Singapore really helped because we can.
Absolutely. One of the key reasons why I left France to Singapore is that back then we had a daughter, and my wife forced me to move from Paris to the suburbs, and to live next to my parents-in-law. So, and I, being a real Parisian, I hate going outside of, Paris proper. And so then I try to flee as far as possible from my in-laws.
What is it about French people? A lot of French people say that it's better to have their career here. What about the tech community? Like when Macron came along, he did make some policies and changes, try to foster innovation, right? How is it going there now?
Yeah, I think one of the big, why it's a very good move to move in Singapore in particular, it's the amount of taxes. I remember when we sold my first company, the mobile company. My friends who were my co-founders and friends who stayed in France, and I because there's no capital gain in Singapore, I paid zero taxes, and they got like 30-40% taxes. So, and over a career of 25 years, that makes a huge difference. So so the level of taxes in France is just insane. And as an entrepreneur as well, there's just so much social laws. All of the employment law is like that thick. It's really difficult to operate as an entrepreneur. So.
What one of the last questions? What would you do? What advice would you give yourself? Maybe like 20 years ago.
20 years ago, I would, if I could go back.
Yeah, if you could go back, what would you do differently?
20 years ago, I would have paid more attention to how much we were spending, to be a bit more conservative when building the company, and not to look for growth at any cost.
Oftentimes, a lot of startups is just like grow, and they're not looking at that balance sheet and not thinking about their profit, right? I mean, you have companies who have grown so big and they are still not profitable. You don't buy into that school of.
Absolutely, and that's what to discuss about the more global tech scene in Southeast Asia. I think the fact that it's getting harder at the moment for startups to get financing also forces them to be more to look more at the P&L and try to be profitable, because actually
the tide has changed, right?
Exactly. So the still not raising money. I think that's one of the mistakes as well. From where too many people are measuring success on how much money was raised, which is we should look at the bottom line more.
Do you think this funding winter is coming to an end anytime soon?
In this part of the world,
in Asia,
I think we still need a bit more time. So I would say at least another 6 months.
You're also an avid investor yourself. What kind of companies or young startup entrepreneurs you're looking for?
Well, I'm mostly doing things which is fintech, ideally around payment, because I try to take the habit of really investing into things I understand. I always want to see some revenues, so I usually don't invest on just PowerPoint slides or something like this. We need to see some level of traction, and I think it's very important for founders to go to the market as fast as possible. Some people are just spending too much time on building a product, trying to get something perfect. But the only way to know what's what's going to work is to talk to clients.
Would you continue this journey?
After AAA?
After AAA?
I don't know, I think it will be difficult to stop because, it's always like my wife hates me for that because when there's a problem. So if there's a problem, there's a business. So
you're always strategizing, talking about business ideas.
Yeah, trying to solve problems. Yeah.
You also always want to win?
Yeah, very much. I don't take no for an answer. But as I was saying, what I really love is proving my point. What I love is when people were telling me that like TransferTo at the very beginning, sending money to a mobile phone in Africa. Back then it was like, but they don't even have enough money to buy food. They shouldn't even have a mobile phone. That's the kind of typically the white male who are making the decisions. Yeah. And when I got this kind of feedback from early VCs, even our SMS when we were raising money in '99, that's really the thing I love, is like to prove them that I was right and they were wrong.
Along the way, you have done that many times. That must feel so good.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you. That was Eric Barbier, CEO at AAA. Please like, share, and subscribe to Asia Tech Lens.